Hey, everybody. Welcome again to the Winning Digital Customers Show. And happy Mother's Day. I hope you all had a wonderful weekend celebrating your mothers, your grandmothers, wives, all the women in our lives who make such a difference in bringing us into this world, caring for us, and nurturing us. And today, I want to dedicate the show to talking about the women who've done that for our digital world. Oops, I'm on the wrong slide. There we go. Because, so often, isn't that the way in the world today? When we think of the people who've been the leaders and have developed the digital world that we enjoy today, I hate to say it, but so often the first people that come to mind are men. Men like Jeff Bezos, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, et cetera, et cetera. Why my brain's blanking on Mark Andreessen. That's the person who I was about to say. Mark Zuckerberg, right? So many men are front and center as leaders of, shall we say, the digital revolution. And yet, there are many, many women who have been absolutely as important, and in some cases more important than their male counterparts. And today, in honor of Mother's Day, I want to take a moment and just really quickly rattle through some women who really deserve to be remembered and recognized for their trailblazing roles in getting us to where we are today in a digital world. So let's dive right in. Let's start first by talking about a woman named Ada Lovelace. She was born in 1815. Can you believe all the way back then she was helping build a digital world? Ada was the daughter of the famous British romantic poet Lord Byron. And she was a mathematical genius, which led her to work with Charles Babbage. You might know Charles Babbage. He was the inventor of something called the analytical engine. It was a theoretical computer, a conceptual idea for a computer that was not able to be built at the time. But Ada is often referred to as the world's first computer programmer because she thought about how you could actually create code to run on this conceptual computer that Charles Babbage conceived of. And it was her notes on Babbage's analytical engine that Alan Turing used to form the inspiration of the first modern computer built in the 1940s. So we start all the way back in the early 19th century, recognizing Ada Lovelace, who is seen as, even though she didn't have a computer, and there wouldn't be a computer for more than 100 years, the world's first computer programmer. Now let's move on to Grace Hopper, who was one of the early developers of programming languages when computers actually came into existence. Grace Hopper was born in 1906. She received her PhD in mathematics from Yale. She was one of the first programmers to work on the Harvard Mark I computer, one of the first computers. And she is one of the original creators of COBOL, one of the first high-level programming languages. Hopper also invented the first compiler, which is software that takes human-written computer code and translates it into machine language so that it can run faster on computers. Grace Hopper is also well known for coining the term the computer bug, which I'm sure you know means a mistake or an error or a problem that has to be fixed in a computer program. In her case, back then, computers didn't have, they were mostly mechanical and transistors and running on cards and other things that were in them. But she was having a problem with the program, and she opened up the computer to try to figure out what the problem was. And there was actually a moth stuck in the mechanical workings of the computer that was causing the problem. She removed the moth, she taped it into her logbook, and this was the first bug ever found in a computer. But of course, it is not for that humorous anecdote that we should most remember and respect Grace Hopper, but for the fact that she was one of the creators and created some of the foundational concepts behind computer programming, which we still use today. COBOL is still in use in some places, believe it or not, but even to the degree we're no longer using the language she invented, the concepts in it then became part of more recent computer languages. And of course, the idea of the compiler is still a key part of almost all computer programming today. Next person I want to recognize, Hedy Lamarr. Hedy Lamarr was a famous American actress born in 1915. You may remember her from such films as Cecil B. DeMille's film Samson and Delilah. So clearly she was a Hollywood superstar of her day. What does that have to do with the world of technology and digital? Well, nothing really, except that in addition to her acting talent and her stardom in entertainment, she was also an inventor. And in 1942, in fact, she was awarded a patent for a communication system that she developed together with composer George Antheil, and it was called the frequency hopping system. And this was a concept for communications protocols that was initially intended to allow radio-guided torpedoes to be sent off course during the war. In other words, it was a military application for this method of messing with radio-based communication with torpedoes. But the same concepts that she invented for her frequency hopping system were then built on and evolved and elaborated on and became fundamental principles of telecommunications used in protocols like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and GPS. So Hedy Lamarr is often referred to as the mother of Wi-Fi. She didn't invent Wi-Fi, but she invented some of the fundamental concepts of the way that radio frequencies are used for telecommunications that are used in so many of the protocols we use today. And a famous actress. How about that? How's that for multi-talented? Next, let's move on to Annie Easley. She was born in 1933. She was a computer scientist and mathematician. But before she was working with computers, she was one of the people who worked at NASA as a human computer. You may be aware that the term computer came from the job description. There was a time that being a computer was like being a plumber or being an accountant. You were a computer. You were a person whose job it was to compute things, to add things up, to do math. And so she was one of a number of African-American women at NASA who helped with things like the development of the code for the Apollo space program. Her code that she wrote ultimately was still in use, or concepts behind it in the space shuttle program, the Centaur rocket. Today, some of the code that she wrote and some of her colleagues is also used in technology and things like the batteries used in hybrid cars. She was one, as I mentioned, of a number of women who were the great thinkers at NASA behind how to start applying real computers, technological computers, transistor-based computers, et cetera, to some of these mathematical problems to solve the challenges of human flight in space and other space programs. You may be familiar with the film Hidden Figures, which talked about some of these women at NASA in that era. It included other women such as Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, and Mary Jackson. So we're including Annie Easley here. She was one of a number of women, rocket scientists, computers, and computer programmers at NASA in the middle of the last century. Okay, moving on. Any one of these women, by the way, we could do a whole 30-minute live cast on. So I feel a little bad that I keep moving along with just these quick summaries. But our goal here is to give you a survey. There's books written about all of these women, and obviously you could learn much more about them than I'm trying to quickly summarize here today. So next we're going to talk about Elizabeth Feinler. She was born in 1931, and she ran the Network Information Center in California, which was kind of like a prehistoric Google. In the early days of the web and things like FTP and Gopher and other early internet protocols, that was the first place that you could publish directories for the internet, the original white pages and yellow pages for the internet. And it was her group that she ran at the Network Information Center that also developed the domain naming scheme that we use today of domains like .com, .edu, .gov.net, et cetera. Of course, the number of domains has multiplied manyfold since those days. But she was a pioneer who was responsible for those navigational components of the modern internet. So certainly another person who deserves recognition as a pioneer and one of the founders, originators, and in the context of today's talk, mothers of today's digital world. Next, I want to talk about Mary Wilkes. Mary Wilkes was born in 1937 in Chicago, and she worked with a variety of different early computers at the time, such as the IBM 709 and the IBM 704. And she's best known for designing the software for the Link, which was one of the earliest systems of interactive. It was an early personal computer. It was transistor based, and she wrote the software for it. And she actually put one in her home. And she is known as the first home computer user because, to the best of our knowledge, she's the first person who actually decided to take a computer. You can see it if you can see the picture in it behind. It's this transistor-based computer. It takes up the better part of a bookshelf, it looks like there. But in any case, she was the first person that we know of to actually have a computer installed in our home. So Mary Wilkes, an early pioneer of the idea that the computer belongs in the home, an idea, of course, that many years later, a man, Bill Gates, would take up as the sort of marching cry, the rallying cry for Microsoft, that there should be a computer in every home. So let's turn next and talk about Adele Goldberg. Adele Goldberg was born in 1945, and she is well known because in the 70s, she was a researcher at the Xerox PARC Center, where she was one of the people who built something called Smalltalk. And Smalltalk was the programming language that allowed the first creation of a graphical user interface, things like windows and a pointer and a mouse. And she is perhaps within that context most famous because it was Adele Goldberg who gave the famous presentation to Steve Jobs. For those who know the history of Apple, Apple's first computers were like DOS. They were, green screens. You had to type everything into the computer. And when he was thinking about creating the next generation of computer, Steve Jobs was given a demo of the earliest computers that had been created with a graphical user interface, which were done at Xerox R&D Center, Xerox PARC. And it was Adele Goldberg who gave Steve Jobs the demo that showed him for the first time concepts like applications running in Windows that you could open and close and drag around on the screen, the idea of a mouse, the idea of a pointer, the idea of drop-down menus, many of these elements that became part of the Macintosh and then, of course, then became part of Windows and are core to how we interact with computers today, were created by the group that she was in. She was the only woman in that group, and it was she who gave the demo to Steve Jobs. So that is Adele Goldberg's really important place in the history of our digital world. Moving on, let's talk about Radia Perlman. She was born in 1951, got a PhD in computer science from MIT, and she is nicknamed the mother of the internet because she invented the algorithm, the STP algorithm, that stands for the Spanning Tree Protocol algorithm. That is one of the key algorithms that makes today's internet possible. It makes it possible for networks to self-organize and move data, and basically creates the basic rules behind how internet traffic moves around on the internet. So without getting too technical, Radia Perlman's deep, very detailed inventions about how to organize data as it moves around a very complex and heterogeneous network are concepts that we still rely on today every single day. We're using it right now. You're using it right now to be able to watch this video, I'm sure. And we want to acknowledge and recognize her massive contribution to our digital world. Okay, just a couple left, and we're getting more into modern times. I wanted to include here Sheryl Sandberg. Sheryl, of course, was originally at Google. She's one of the most successful women in Silicon Valley. She worked as the vice president of online sales and operations at Google, very involved in things like AdWords. And then she went to Facebook at a time when Facebook was popular but didn't really have a revenue model. And she was the person who created the entire advertising platform that allows targeted advertising on Facebook. Love it or hate it, it has been transformational, not only for their business, not only for the advertising industry, as Facebook is now one of the largest advertising revenue receivers in the world, but in addition, I would argue transformational for our culture and transformational for business. It's been misused, but it also is a way that any small entrepreneur can reach niche audiences that may be interested in a given product or given service. It is a transformational technology sitting on top of many of the technologies that other women in this presentation created, that sit on top of the programming languages and compilers and network protocols that many of the other women that we've just been talking about created. So certainly hats off to Sheryl Sandberg, who in addition to all of her success in technology and business is also a best-selling author and has written several books on leadership, which have become widely popular. Now, I think this is our last one. No, second last one. So let's talk about Susan Kare. Susan Kare worked at Apple, and she was one of the creators of many of the early and most well-known designs in the world of human interface. She was a human interface designer, and she worked actually for many companies, including Facebook and Pinterest and Apple and Microsoft. At Apple, though, she created the iconic trash can icon. She created the pointing finger icon. She created the paste icon and the scissors icon. She was creating those early designs for the graphical user interfaces. And even if those exact designs aren't in use anymore, they're a bit dated at this point, they're a low resolution. They were, for many of us, our first experience of being able to interact directly with computer through a graphical user interface. Another woman who's played a major role, maybe a little less technical and more creative and artistic, but nevertheless key to the foundations behind our digital world today. And I want to end with, I hope I say her name right, Susan Wojcicki, and she is currently the CEO of YouTube. Prior to that, she was one of the people at Google. Of course, YouTube is owned by Google. She was one of the people at Google who created AdWords. AdWords is similar to what Sheryl Sandberg did at Facebook. AdWords is the advertising system that allows advertisers to bid on different keywords and have ads appear in your search results. A very different type, very different type of advertising system than what Sheryl Sandberg created at Facebook. Sheryl Sandberg's Facebook system is much more focused on understanding the user and the profile of the user, as you do on a social media site. AdWords is much more about understanding a specific search query and what that person is looking for right now. But nevertheless, these two advertising systems, Facebook's advertising system and Google AdWords, make up now a huge portion of the entire advertising industry, billions and billions and billions of dollars. And she was a major innovator behind the creation of that. And now she's at YouTube, where she was actually one of the people at Google who encouraged the acquisition of YouTube many years ago by Google, and now Alphabet, of course. And she has also led YouTube in many new capabilities that have been important technological innovations, such as the machine learning technology that allows them to identify questionable or copy-protected content, and also many of the advertising components that we see today on YouTube as well. So that's it. I just wanted to talk about, I think that was 11 women. We could easily do 50. There are so many women who've played key roles. Apologize to any that I've missed. If you're watching this, feel free to add to the comments if you think there's some additional women. I'm sure there are. Would love it if you would add women that are not in this, that are deserving of recognition this Mother's Day as additional mothers of today's digital world. And if you have any interesting additional comments or facts on the women I spoke about, I welcome that very much as well. So that's today's tribute to mothers of our digital world today. Again, I hope you had a happy Mother's Day. And now here we are, Mother's Week. Let's make sure we give acknowledgement to those women who've played such a key role. Thanks as always for watching and listening. Winning Digital Customer Show. Look forward to seeing you next time. Till then, keep transforming.